We have a motion by Tao. Is there a second? We have a second by Bemke. So we have a motion and a second to approve the Planning Commission meeting report from May 4th. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Our second item on the agenda is a public hearing and action on Plan 20-0155 Community Development. It's an amendment to Chapter 11 zoning ordinance of the municipal code to define and incorporate a mobile vending use within zoning districts. Mr. Kern?
Sure, Mayor. Just want to clarify, do you want me to give the background first, and then will you open the public hearing, or will you discussion? I just want to make sure that the public hearing is noticed, so that the public, if anyone on the call or in the audience wants to comment. With that being said, I will give you a little brief history first with regards to mobile vending. This item, I'll take it back several months. Chapter 6 which is the streets and permitting part of the municipal code, was amended to include mobile vending. And I had it up. May not be up anymore. Basically, mobile vending was added to that chapter. It discussed the ability for the clerk's office to issue mobile vending permits. It also identified the requirements for mobile vendors, identified a background check that was necessary for mobile vendors, and a few other requirements for individuals that wanted to become a mobile vendor. It also defined mobile vending. And when that was adopted and approved as part of Chapter 6 of the Municipal Code, one thing that did not occur at the same time was the definition within the zoning code. So the zoning code governs all uses within the community, and as such, it's important to include mobile vending within the zoning code to ensure that there are proper protections, for example, within residential zoning districts, to ensure that these food trucks aren't creating noise or lighting within residential zoning areas. With that being said, I am recommending an amendment to Chapter 11, which is the zoning code. The memo outlines the recommendations, and I can walk through it here with the first recommendation to identify it within the land use matrix. And you can see it there on the screen outlined in blue. I'm recommending permitting the use within the B1, B2, B3, B5, I1, P1, M1, M2, and C1 districts. However, I do want to note that within the Parks District and the Conservancy District, I am recommending, there's an asterisk next to each, and I'm recommending that a special events application and approval must be required for those permitted uses in those districts, which is consistent with Chapter 6, which identifies, again, mobile vending. So again, the Parks District and the Conservancy District would need to get a special events permit in order to operate within those districts. So that's what the P with the asterisk signifies there. I'm also recommending that a zoning permit be obtained within our office for mobile vending. Going down further, I'm recommending the same definition as defined in Chapter 6 for mobile vendor. Here we've got a mobile vendor / vending unit. I won't read it, but basically it is the same definition. With regards to parking requirements, I'm recommending that they're exempt. However, if there's a permanent location chosen, let's say a home, that it's not going to affect the ingress/egress to the property, and then that would be part of the review when we issue the zoning permit. Not many other supplemental standards in terms of the use. Keep in mind, however, also that with regards to the zoning districts, the mobile vendor could set up on the street in a legal parking stall as long as it's within those zoning districts. So they could do it in downtown, for example, but they could not do it within a residential neighborhood zoned R2. That would not be a permitted use in that district. And Lastly, we've got another definition here in the definition section, which is just another location within the zoning code where we define every use. With that being said, again, I would recommend these changes as, be incorporated within Chapter 11. The last thing I will note, which was a question earlier brought up by Commissioner Susan, was in regards to the public health. So the Wood County Health Department does also issue a permit for mobile vendors to ensure that all, proper health requirements are being met within a mobile vendor, vending unit, mobile vendor food truck. And that's all I have.
So I guess, why don't we get the public hearing opened up and have our hearing, and then we can take that information in and then talk amongst the commission here to make our recommendations. So let's open up the public hearing. Do I have anybody that wants to speak in favor of the mobile vending permit or change, the mobile vending change in the ordinance? Okay, I'll make a second time. Anybody in favor of speaking in favor of amending Chapter 11 zoning ordinance? And thirdly, is there anybody that would like to speak in favor of amending Chapter 11 zoning ordinance to incorporate the mobile vending? Okay, nobody is speaking in favor. How about, is there anybody that wants to speak against?
It's not going to affect the egress to the property, and that will
Favor of speaking in favor of amending Chapter 11 zoning ordinance. Where's that coming through? How about, is there anybody that would like to speak in favor of amending Chapter 11 zoning ordinance to incorporate the mobile vending? Okay. Is that... Dean, are you listening to this by chance on television also, Dean? Or is that? Okay, so let's.
Meeting start?
So let's call for a second.
I think it did. Are they having a common council meeting?
Nope, we have the planning.
Oh, it's a planning commission meeting, sir.
Well, I know, but they didn't do any introductions, and now they're talking about.
It's on Facebook. That looks like they're talking about planning commission stuff.
Shouldn't we be part of it, though?
That's what I was thinking of.
We are part of it, we're just not there.
We can see you and hear you. Sorry about that, Zoom participants. We did not realize we were having technical issues. We could see you, but we didn't realize you couldn't hear us or participate. So with that, we're actually on item 2, and I had called for 3 times for anybody wishing to speak in favor of the zoning ordinance change to incorporate the mobile vending. I guess to give you an opportunity on Zoom, is there anybody that would like to speak in favor of the mobile vending ordinance change? Okay, not hearing anybody that wish to speak in favor. I'll take a first call at it. Does anyone want to speak against the mobile vending ordinance change? I'll call a second time. Does anybody want to speak against the amendment to Chapter 11 zoning ordinance regarding mobile vending? And lastly, does anybody want to speak against the mobile vending ordinance change to Chapter 11? Okay, hearing none, we will close the public hearing and we'll go into planning commission discussion. Does anybody care to speak? Susan? Yep, green light, there you go.
Green light's on. All right. I have some questions, and it's probably discussion that you've already had, but I, being new to this, am curious about some of the requirements. Sure I can. How's that? Is that better? Okay, first of all, I noted in the past, with no recommendations in place, I guess, or ordinances in place, that the parking requirements, in my mind, are in question with regard to the moving of a cart after its use, for instance. If you put it in a public parking spot, how long is it allowed to be there? And under what circumstances do you get a permit? Is there a charge for a permit?
Cal, would you have those answers?
There is a charge for a permit right now. Again, it's under the clerk's office. And right now, a lot of those answers are in Chapter 6. And I can pull that up for you. I apologize for those that cannot view what I'm referencing here. But again, a lot of the specifics with regards to permitting for mobile vending was identified several months ago in the adoption of this ordinance that you see on the screen, which again defines it, identifies the permit that's required, and this is all through the clerk's office at this point, identifies a background check that's required. Now, I was not here, so I can't speak specifically to some of the initial concerns that came up when this went to Common Council. But there, there's some certainly fees. There's some other restrictions with regards to mobile vending here. Keep in mind that, again, there are some things that may not be fitting within the zoning code, but I think what is fitting is, the parking, certainly, if you did want to provide some sort of parking requirement, it would be appropriate to put it in the zoning code. The definition of the use and the placement within certain zoning districts. There are other potential supplemental standards that could be added with regards to aesthetics or sizing and locations on a specific lot that we could add to the zoning code, but more of the other permitting requirements and restrictions that you see on the screen should be included and are included right now within Chapter 6. I think once we identify the definition within the zoning code, we will likely change the procedures in Chapter 6 shown on the screen to better reflect the use within the zoning district. So right now, if you reference Chapter 6 on the screen, there's no mention of the zoning code, there's no mention of the districts it's permitted in, and I think it would be in our best interest if we identify somewhere in this chapter, Chapter 6, to identify that the use is only permitted within the applicable zones as referenced in the zoning code. So I would anticipate in the next month or so, we would follow up with amending Chapter 6. We've also discussed internally that our office in community development issue the zoning permit and that the clerk's office does not issue the zoning permit. So right now, again, mobile vending as written in Chapter 6 identifies the clerk as the individual that would process the application and issue the permit. So likely in the next month, there'll be another amendment to Chapter 6 that may not go through this body, but may go to legislative committee for review.
Kyle, could you speak to cleanup or refuse requirements? Is that part of Chapter 6 or is that someplace else?
Yes, so I believe it does mention refuse and talks about other requirements within here. Let's see. So here are several restrictions with regards to operating time, different licenses. So you can see on the screen, vending in adjoining areas shall be kept clean and free from litter, garbage, rubble, debris at all times. When leaving a vending area, the mobile vendor shall be responsible for the removal of all litter resulting from vending operations. Vendor shall provide a minimum of 1 leak-proof container for the deposition of waste, garbage, litter, and refuse. So this, I've been told that this was primarily written in response to food trucks that wanted to operate on city streets. However, this did not necessarily prevent them from doing so within residential neighborhoods. So if there was a street that allowed for parking, they could go essentially wherever they wanted to, as long as they followed these guidelines and got a permit through the clerk's office to do so. Hence the reason to follow up and define it in the zoning code and restrict it to certain zoning districts, because I don't think we want 3 food trucks lined up in a residential neighborhood and, tons of cars accessing that local street that may not have the capacity to handle that traffic and cause issues with regards to pedestrians and so forth. So that's why I have not recommended them in residential neighborhoods. But, again, if you want to read what's on the screen, or, want to postpone action on this to get a better understanding of what Chapter 6 already identifies, we can certainly do that as well.
Would you allow me one more question?
You ask all the questions you need to ask.
With regard to the public street scenario, where obviously we have a lot of situations in neighborhoods where there may be a park, and on the opposite side of the street, it would be residential and zoned residential. How do you define where a vending truck can be? Is it the center of the road, or how would those situations be
Sure.
dealt with?
So technically, while on a zoning map, the roads are kind of this white space, technically the zoning districts meet in the middle of the right-of-way. So if you have a park, technically whatever side of the street, that park is located on, it would extend into the roadway until it hits the center line. Then the opposite side of the street that's zoned residential would meet at the center line as well. So if we ran into a case where there was somebody complaining that, let's use the example of a commercial abutting residential, because with parks, the special event permit is required before they could operate in that district anyways. But in a permitted district like commercial, if they had, let's say in downtown, that abuts a lot of surrounding residential, if we had a complaint that the food truck was on, let's say, the right side of the street, which was adjacent to the residential district, and the commercial was on the opposite side, we could then enforce that requirement that the food truck would have to locate on the opposite side of the street, which would be the commercial side, because it would be in violation if it were on the residential side.
We're embarking on the opening of a very significant water park feature at Whitterfield, for instance. And I know that part of the opportunity for paying for some of the services that will be offered there would be a concession. And we've got several sides of that property where there are a multitude of different, probably zoning situations. A different one on 8th Street, for instance, as opposed to Chestnut Street or Lincoln Street, or I think that's Peach Street on the interior side. Has there been any thought given to the wishes of the community with regard to allowing that kind of activity within, say, for instance, that venue?
So I believe Whitterfield is zone conservancy, and so you would, the only way you could operate a food truck either on-site or on the streets to the center line adjacent would be with that special event permit. And that would have to go through the clerk's office and, I forget what committee, what does it go through? Finance and Property? Yeah. So all special event permits would, again, within the Conservancy and the Parks District zones, they would need that special events permit through Finance and Property before they could operate a food truck. So it would be up to that body that grants those special events permits to determine whether or not they wanted those food trucks on site or on adjacent streets to those districts.
And with that,
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Kern? Those participants on Zoom, commissioners? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. I guess seeing no other questions or comments or concerns was the committee's wishes, or commission's wishes. And, I'm sorry, who was that? Oh, okay, thank you, Mr. Burkhart. So a motion by Mr. Burkhart to amend or incorporate the amendments to Chapter 11 zoning code regarding mobile vending. And Mr. Towle seconds it. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Is there any opposition? And is there any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. So it leads us to our final agenda item, which is adjournment. We have a motion by Mr. Bemke to adjourn. And we have by Ms. Feith. Seconded it. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.